Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, potentially. Welcome to LoopUp Live Talking Teams. My name is Ben Lee. I'm the Microsoft Technology Lead at LoopUp, which means that I'm involved in stuff relating to our direct routing platform, a little bit of pre-sales and some sort of third-party connections and interop stuff. Last time round, if you were with us, I was joined by Graham Cropley, who's Head of Consulting, and this month I'm joined by Jason, who is Director of Consulting in North America. Hi, Jason.
Hey,
Um,
man.
do you want to just give people a quick 30 seconds on what you do and who you are?
Yep, my name is Jason Sloan. Been in this voice world for Microsoft for about 10 years now. Here at LoopUp, I'm the Director of Consulting North America. So really I work with North America side on organizations moving to teams, helping, get that journey started and figure out how to get there without major pitfalls and a successful movement without major problems. So happy to be here. Glad you chose 10 o'clock my time, not 10 o'clock your time.
No, very good. Well, hey, you might not be thanking me because I've been having Wi-Fi issues today. I've also been having webcam issues. So, like up until about 30 seconds ago, if I raised my hand up, I'd fade out because my camera shenanigans were failing. But all things being well, we'll see how we get on.
Fantastic.
So, today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Teams calling, direct routing, operator connect, or calling plans. That's kind of our official title. But I guess just to start the chat today, it's worth doing a little bit of a kind of a recap or a bit of background, isn't there, about what calling plans and direct routing are, and we'll save operator connect for a little bit later in the conversation, I guess. So, both of those things are ways of delivering telephony into Teams, and that was the subject of our discussion last month. And by telephony, we mean not calling Teams to Teams, or not necessarily joining a Teams meeting or doing PSTN calling into a Teams meeting. We're talking about a PSTN call from a Teams user or to a Teams user, and calling plans and direct routing is the way we achieve that. And do you see those as being feature equivalent of each other? Is there something you get with one versus the other at a high level?
I would say there's definitely gaps, right? So calling plans is a little quicker and geared more toward small business, I would say. It's all in the tenant. You can do everything you need to do there. With direct routing, it's more flexible in what you can do with it, such as configuring third-party applications, such as analog devices and things of that nature. So really, you have to pick and choose what's good for your environment, and that's kind of where we come in and help. Is hey, what's good for you? Let's talk about this, and I'd say that's the biggest piece between the two. Flexibility.
So calling plans. When we say calling plans, what we mean is you take your numbers and you take your telephony service from Microsoft, right? Like you buy your Office 365 SKU or M365 SKU. You then add on a license type to say, I want to also have a phone number ported to Microsoft or taken from Microsoft. In the way with all of these things, you have to move numbers around through carriers through porting, and then you pick and choose a bundle, and then that's it, right? Jobs are good, and you get your service from Microsoft. So what is direct routing then? Like what's the summary version of what direct routing is?
So it's really bring your own carrier or SIP trunks, essentially, right? So if you have SBCs on-prem, you can hook them up to Teams.
So SBCs?
Yeah, SBC, session border controller. So, think about kind of like your traditional PBX has some type of connection into PSTN. That would be what direct routing is. So a hardware box that you own, you manage, you control it. Your SBCs take the connections from the PSTN, Verizon, whoever it may be, and then send the calls up into Teams and outbound, right? So you have complete control from A to Z, except for, of course, when it gets out on the carrier network.
Okay. And I guess that's, one of the things, again, we'll talk about in a few minutes, is there are different variants of direct routing depending on whether you run that yourself, you run it out of a cloud, you come to a partner or provider who runs it,
sure.
All the sort of stuff we do where, we can give you connectivity and a wraparound to kind of manage the other elements of the telephony service as you need. So I guess going back to calling plans, you were sort of saying there's a time and a place for calling plans there, but you also alluded to sort of integration and that sort of stuff. Is that something you need to be cautious of if you're looking to go down the calling plans routes?
Very cautious, right? If you plan a migration into calling plans without thinking about those third-party solutions, you could find yourself in a situation where your analog, as an example, faxing, things of that nature don't work.
Hmm.
If you port your phone numbers into calling plans, Microsoft being your carrier at that point, it's completely cloud-based. And if you port those phone numbers away, that stuff's not going to work. Right? So then you have to think
And
about.
that's because it's kind of quite black box, right? It's like you
Correct.
move your numbers to Microsoft, you take them from them, and that's it. But then
Yeah,
that comes
exactly.
with there's convenience.
Convenience.
Convenience is that you don't have anything else to worry about.
Correct. It's all up there. It just calls in and out. That's it. Right? No managing of anything that you need to jump onto and configure in terms of an SBC or a PBX at that point.
Okay, and then one of the things we say with direct routing is it's flexibility. It's bring your own trunk. You've got carrier choices. Like with calling plans, there's also a restriction around the geographies that you can get
Yep.
coverage in. So if you're a multinational organization, great. It might be that calling plans fit because they are available in the countries that you have offices or locations. And if you don't have coverage, then what do you do? What's your choice?
Yeah, it's direct routing. Fall back to that, right? And you can put SBCs in those different countries, right? Turkey, Australia, the U.S., wherever you want to put them. That gives you the flexibility to make connections all over the globe. And that also comes with a not necessarily a cost, but some limitations as well.
Hmm. So if calling plans are winning on convenience, does that
Yep.
mean that direct routing is complicated and difficult to deploy, or again, does it depend on your size and your scope? Like, what are the factors that make it tricky?
Yeah, so there's more configuration because you have to own the configuration of those SBCs and direct routing. So that can be tricky if you don't have the expertise in house to make that connection happen. And then inside the Teams admin center, there's also some configurations that need to be done that wouldn't be done with calling plans. It's just kind of there, right? So it does take more thought and configuration on how to make that work. And so, yeah, I would say generally speaking, it's more tricky, but that comes with the flexibility to put connections all over the globe.
to make the service work in any way that you
Yep,
want it to work. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing you mentioned there about there's more complicated stuff that you have to do in TAC Teams Admin Console or in your tenant admin.
Yeah.
And I guess this is where maybe it's time to talk about Operator Connect, which is kind of a way that Microsoft's looking at bridging some of these gaps or some of these differences. So Operator Connect, correct me if I'm wrong, but not many people necessarily know exactly what this is because it's something that's still in preview and it's not it's not formally live or not something that you can kind of sign up for today. But essentially, the idea is that you'll be able to see certain carriers who are part of that program in the Teams admin console, and you can then select which countries you want, whether you want new numbers, take port numbers. But then my understanding is that you can configure those users through the admin center, which at the moment with direct routing, it's a mix of PowerShell and maybe some on-prem stuff that has to happen in AD, etc. So Operator Connect sort of seems to be a way of bringing the best of both worlds there, right?
Yeah, that's how I view it as well. It's like you said, it's limited. What we have access to is the general public, but I do see it as a Microsoft wrapper around third-party carriers that you may want to bring. Right, so it gives you that functionality in the tenant to make some of those configurations happen and bring your contracts essentially.
Yeah, and there's another acronym to throw in the mix there, isn't there? This MAPS, the Microsoft Azure Peering Service, seems to be the connectivity method. So instead of having direct routing trunks over the internet or over ExpressRoute or over something else, you've got like a direct peering into Microsoft for that. But again, I guess that isn't necessarily a clear way forward, depending on if you need integration and things again. Because if you need analog devices or a contact center that can't be Teams integrated, something like that, then that's where those SBCs come in, right? Where you have a black box that can speak anything you like on any side of it and make sure that everything can call each other.
Yeah, exactly. The Operator Connect at this point, the way we understand it, there is no ability to configure or modify the carrier SBCs to have those third-party integrations.
Yeah.
Right. So putting more things on-prem then and have them completely separated could be a positive for your organization, could be a negative. Again, that's where we have to talk about it, figure out what's the best route.
So there's a question from Martin in the chat there. Hi, Martin. Good to see you again. Around whether customers can mix and match the solutions. And I guess that's kind of to the point at the start of the call that both of these are delivery methods of providing Teams telephony, and we don't care if we have some users on one and some users on the other. Like it's fair game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fair game. You can definitely mix and match, and it's not uncommon. As this space continues to mature, I will see that possibly could become less common. As carriers have more global coverage, you could put it all in one spot, right? But to answer your question, yes, you can mix and match. There's nothing that says you can't.
And it's like you say, it's not uncommon that a company's tested calling plans because it's simple to get up and running. You can validate that things are right, but then it depends what you want to test through a pilot deployment, because you might be changing users' numbers. You're not necessarily able to spoof outbound, etc., etc.
Yeah, features, right, and support, right? Maybe you want to test support, right? What's the support plan from calling plans? What's that look like? Is that, do you have somebody you can easily call, right? And then with direct routing,
well, it's Microsoft. You call Microsoft, and surely that's a good thing though, because then you've got Microsoft's responsible for Teams, Microsoft's responsible for the calling service. So if I've got a voice quality problem, like I'm going to get good responses, right? It's all through Microsoft, or is that?
Yeah, it can be positive, right? And there could be downsides. It depends if you need to get to that carrier on the back end. Having that conversation triage might be difficult, right? But it's a one-stop shop, single pane of glass, right? It just depends again on your needs, right? And a risk reward, what's good, what's bad for your organization.
But then you didn't bite when we were prepping this. You were saying that a support call, you tend to have to jump through the like what version of Windows have you got, what version of the client, etc., etc. And when you just have a core quality issue, you kind of want to be able to go talk to the source about it's not any of those other service elements. So I guess direct routing or operator connect, you potentially have access to the carriers slightly more directly to help there.
Eyes on the problem quicker, in my mind, right? Yeah. So that's how I look at it.
So in terms of costings, not figures particularly, but we're saying direct routing is sort of edging it a little bit in terms of flexibility depending on your needs. What about the flexibility for calling plans for billing? Right? Is you just buy a license from Microsoft and that's it? You get a bundle of minutes? How does that work?
Yeah, you pay for convenience. So there's a license for the calling plan that's there. You click the button, you have it, and the cost is what it is, right? And you can't really negotiate that, right? So I would say you pay for convenience in that situation, but yeah, you do have minutes at that point as well.
Yeah. And then what versus direct routing, where it's either carrier relationships that you've got at the moment, or it is something that you can negotiate as part of a global deployment where you've got scale that you can leverage and potentially multiple geographies, and you can kind of pull all of those things together, right?
Exactly. So direct routing allows you to talk to somebody who maybe can say, hey, you're a little expensive on your calling plan. Can we negotiate this based on scale? Right. But then also is, if you're a global coverage, you may have to talk to 6 different carriers, depending how big it is. And that can be, problematic as well. Right. But maybe that's how your business works and you're fine with that. But again, that's where OC comes in, where maybe you have one carrier. Right.
Well, and let's be fair. That's kind of what we're endeavoring to do, right? That's what we at LoopUp are here. That we are regulated in many different countries and have interconnects and legs and connections in many parts around the world. So in theory, we can be that one-stop shop for a call provider, right?
Yep, exactly. Global coverage.
So I guess we said we'd kind of park it for later. Maybe now's the time that in direct routing there are different ways that you can actually deploy it. And so at one end is what we do, which is we are a multi-tenanted carrier hosting platform for direct routing, which means that we have big carrier grade SBCs deployed at strategic points around the world, and we have big trunks in and out of them, and then we've got our carrier connections in and out of them. But if someone was looking to do this themselves, obviously we've got a whole bunch of resiliency and redundancy built in there. If you're looking to emulate that yourselves, you've still got a couple of choices for how to deploy that you're either putting physical gateways on site, or you can deploy gateways in AWS or Azure, or as virtual machines on your infrastructure. What would be a particular reason why you might need to have a physical SBC? Like, surely things these days, it just makes sense to go virtual and you get flexibility there.
There's regulations in some countries where you just simply they can't terminate into the into the cloud. Or you might need to hook up something physical, such as an analog. You need to route off that may be more difficult in the cloud. So there's a few reasons why, all right? And so you just have to profile where you're going, do your due diligence, talk to the carriers, how they can get PSTN into your environment, and then make the decision based on that.
Yeah. Okay. And again, with SBCs, like, is there particular requirements that you have to think about for them? Like, do they require much effort, much maintenance? What do you need to do to kind of get up and running?
Well, sizing is important. Certified SBCs is important. Make sure it's on the list with Microsoft so it works properly.
Mm-hmm.
Not just any SBC will work from a certified standpoint. You might be able to make it work, but it doesn't mean you can pick up the phone and get help when something breaks, right? So those would be a couple things. And then connectivity, such as ports for analog, if that's
Okay.
important to you, right? So really
Like
have to
ports as in physical interconnectivity to
exactly,
them, right?
yes, yep, exactly. So you might have to have a fax machine hanging off of it, or maybe a PRI connection, right? It just depends on what it is, right? So it comes back to, again, profiling where you're at, what you need to make your PSTN connectivity work, solve all your needs.
And in the same way that we're saying we can mix direct routing with calling plans, can we mix different versions of direct routing, or does it have to be you've got one deployed and configured in your tenant and that's it? Like, what is it you have to do in your tenant to make this work?
It's completely flexible. You can have all three if you really
Right.
wanted it, right? It's just when you make the configurations and the planning, you just have to ensure that the routing is correct, so the user is using the flavor needed for them, we'll call it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where some of the complexity comes in, is to ensure that the calls go where they're supposed to go, for maybe regulatory reasons, right? In certain countries, the calls have to go in and out of that country, so you don't want to accidentally make a mistake.
And that's where some of the terminology around location-based routing and media bypass and that sort of stuff. So Teams has the capabilities underneath to determine the location of a user and then make the best decision about how to route calls.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And I guess another thing that relies on location is emergency calling. Like, Teams is capable of supporting E911 and various other emergency calling regulations around the world. Is that something that's a consideration between calling plans and direct routing, or a service-based offering there?
It is a consideration. So it's kind of built in with calling plans, right? So it's there. You still have to configure your locations, but as you start moving forward the next flavors, which would be direct routing or hosted service, you have to think about how's that call going to route when it gets to the SBCs, right? Where's it going to go? What is required by law where you're at, maybe per state? What's the location going to look like inside a team? So it becomes a little bit more complex as you move through each type of direct routing. Right? So due diligence of thinking it through, right? It's really more North America based, right? At this point in time, we expect that to grow over the coming years, but right now it's really North America based. You have to think that through.
Okay, so it sounds like you win in terms of flexibility. You potentially win in terms of cost because you can negotiate, you can kind of right size. You're not locked into the bundle version that Microsoft have, because again, like as I understand it, on the calling plan side, you have either domestic or domestic and international, and then there's a small, medium, and a large, and that's your lot. You can't kind of break it down any further and do stuff differently. Whereas with direct routing, it depends what carrier you've got or which partner potentially you've gone to and how they do bundles. So the flip side of that is that it's more complicated. Is it always going to be more complicated doing direct routing, or is there anything to simplify that process?
So it can be simplified with a partner can help, right? If you're not going to take it on by yourself, and then as things mature as well, what's the partner doing to help supplement those configuration needs? Are things getting easier out of PowerShell into a portal-based system where it's a click the button kind of situation, right? So I would say it's going to get, I don't like the word easy, right? It's just, I don't know, more streamlined as things go forward. So it still takes a lot of thinking to make sure that when you click the button that configures something, it's the right click at the right time and you don't mess something up, right? So, but yeah, generally speaking, I figure it's going to get a little more streamlined as time moves forward.
Okay. So there's a couple of questions just caught my eye down the side there, which
Sure.
I'll answer the first one. And I'm going to throw the E911 one to you if you want to
All right.
read that. But correct me if I'm wrong. But there's a question here from Ahmed about can you do something like hotlines where you pick up a phone and it just auto dials a number? So the answer is a consultant answer. It's like it depends, but yes, you can, because it's not something that Teams natively lets you do. You can't have a Teams device signed in that will do that type of functionality. But if you've got direct routing deployed, if you're using SBCs, if those SBCs have standard SIP-based registration capabilities where you can register a phone against them, or you can, potentially with certain FXS connections for analog devices, you can then configure those non-Teams devices that when you pick them up, they will immediately place a call to whatever hotline number that hits your SBC, and then you can route that to Teams. You can route it to whatever your endpoint is. So kind of the solution as a whole, no, Teams natively doesn't do it. Is it something you can do as part of your Teams deployment? Yes, it is.
In general, yep. Calling plans becomes a little more difficult, obviously, if you want to integrate them. We won't go into those details, but yeah, for the most part, it can be more difficult.
So do you want to take that E911 of bandwidth and Interado versus Red Sky?
Yeah, if I'm understanding it correctly, my thoughts on the service offerings that are certified, I think it's the way to go, right? I know in the past there's some offers had a third-party piece of software that required some integration or some typing in by end users. I think it's better to stay with the certified providers, because you really get to use Teams location-based capabilities in the client all the way through, configure it. There's no third party, anything for the end user. It's just there. And it's all dynamic, right? So if you move around, you don't have to tell somebody to type in where they are, especially inside the network. Right now, as things move outside the network and you're roaming, like a Starbucks, whatnot, that's going to be different. And we expect some things to come out soon with that. But at least internal, when we get back in the office, using native Teams to help with that location is definitely the priority. If I answered that correctly, hope so.
Good stuff.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess if you were looking at a flow chart of how you might make a call between calling plans and direct routing, you got both of them at the top. Like you look at it and it's like, what's your first choice? It's going to be, does calling plans do the locations that I want? If it's not, then immediately you're on to a flavor of direct routing, right? But if calling plans does look suitable, then it's that scalability thing and the costs that you were talking about, isn't it? Of like, can you right size the bundles, the packages? Does it make sense? Is it financially viable? Are there support options there that you need for something where, like telephony is a fairly business critical service? Can you get answers to problems in a timely fashion? And if not, it's like, well, again, you go down the direct routing path. Or if you need to do integrations, again, you're pushed down the direct routing path. Then if we look at direct routing, of those choices of, roll your own or go with a partner, what's the main consideration there, really? Like, to me, it's just about the responsibility or the outsourcing of responsibility, isn't it? Of how much you want to be responsible for managing, maintaining, feeding, watering, upgrading, supporting, dealing with those gateways. But then it's not just those gateways, it's the internet connectivity, the carrier connectivity. What else is this? Is that a fair assessment of the breakdown between the services and doing it yourself?
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to when organizations are trying to make that decision. It's just, what's your expertise in-house? Do you want to handle this from all the way to the end, the SBCs and all the stuff you just talked about? Or are you wanting to get out of that business and not touch anything, right? When it comes to that, that's when the decision typically goes back to the business and they make it, right? And sometimes cost just doesn't matter. Like, we just don't touch it.
What about if like some of those scenarios you were talking about before, where like in UAE you have to have a physical gateway on site because that's the legal requirements, or the hot phone where you have to have a gateway doing analog interop there? Does that preclude you from going down the service provider route, and therefore why would you have 90% on service provider and 10% that you have to manage yourself? Or can you package all of that in with a service provider as well?
You could package it all into the service provider depending on what they offer, right? Yep. So you could do direct routing wherever you need to do it, or a direct routing service provider. Maybe they do it all, right? So again, it goes back to that ability to be flexible. You're not tied into just one solution, right? Because you're one company. It really comes down to geographic and making sure you meet the rules where you're going in at.
Yeah. And then lastly, I guess in terms of actual implementation or migration, does your choice affect how you go about deploying teams, would you say? Like your actual end user rollout and your overall project approach, would you do anything different?
Not a whole lot, right? And this is what I talk to quite frequently about with organizations is how do you get there, right? And the project plan doesn't really change. It's just the skill set to do some of the next steps when you have to do your own SBCs or just put in the steps, right? So the planning is important up front. Everything up front, test stage, and then move over your users when they're trained and they feel like they're ready. It doesn't matter what's on the back end per se from a user standpoint. You just want to make sure that the plan is solid.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Well, I think we're kind of on 25 minutes or so. We might call that a day for this month's episode. In terms of stuff that we've got coming up, we've got a date of 30th of September for our next episode. Depending on what people want to hear, we can either take that down a slightly deeper technical route and go kind of deep dive into stuff like phones, devices, meeting rooms, what sort of equipment you might have, or potentially we can mix it up a little bit and talk through with some of our project managers' kind of project approach for how you deploy teams, how you take porting. So, that's to be determined. But if anybody has any views, feel free to leave us a note out on the LinkedIn pages, and we'll take that into consideration for the next ones. But Jason, thank you very much. I guess just wrapping us out, what's your summary then of calling plans versus direct routing? What's the pithy little way we can end this?
I tend to be slanted more toward direct routing because I like flexibility, right? So the calling plans, I would say, slant more towards small business, real small business. Mm-hmm. But if you are an organization that meets that small to medium and then larger, I think direct routing is the way to go.
There we go. So it's all the same from an end user point of view, and it's just down to flexibility of if you can do what you need to do.
Exactly.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you everyone out there.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.